I wanted to build a sauna. When I got to the ventilation part, there were 1,000 different ways to do that online. I found out that the best way is the oldest way. I'm talking about a chunk of dry ice basically just pouring CO2 out.
Guess who's coming to sauna? Hekilunta. Guess who's coming to sauna? Hekilunta.
Hello, and welcome everybody to another live edition of the Upper Bench Sauna podcast. No, it's a gorgeous day down here in South Carolina. I was making a couple modifications to my sauna tonight, but we'll get into that later. Risto, good evening. What do you got cooking?
Not too much. It's our spring weather's kind of crazy here. Sunny, cold, warm, every bit of it rainy. But we had a good sauna the other night, just our whole family together. We don't do that very often with all the kids and everything, but that was pretty good.
Excellent. Arrow, good evening.
Good evening. Yeah, it's obviously nice to talk to you guys. I just came last night from Chicago. I gave a sauna speech there, and in a true U.S. way how things go. So I was supposed to fly from 4 o'clock flight from Chicago to New York. I ended up in Syracuse because of the foul weather. Yeah, and I didn't know if weather was going to go back to New York or not, but I made it actually totally fine back home, but only like 3-4 hours later than I thought I would. But anyway, so it's all good. You know, I'm doing the traveling. I will be in Bellingham, Washington on Friday next week. So my sauna travels are continuing. But anyway, so we are so glad to have a special guest today, James Phelps, aka Jimmy Creel, who wrote this fantastic book about sauna building. And we started corresponding, I don't know, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. It's been a while. But anyway, so super exciting. James, why on earth? Why did you write this book?
Well, that's a long story, but try to make it very short. I got to the ventilation part. I wanted to build the sauna. When I got to the ventilation part, there were 1,000 different ways to do that online. And even some authors said things to do. So I decided I was going to test every one. And I checked the carbon dioxide levels. I did everything with thermodynamic scientific processes. After I got that all done, I decided I'm going to write a book about that as well to share that information. And I found, just to be brief, I found out that the best way is the oldest way, the way that goes back to the very beginning. And it's a Finnish tradition way, and you can see that in the Havarna stoves, and you can see that in the Narva stoves, how that's done. And now I'm not talking about electric here. I don't know a thing about them. It's just all wood-fired here, so.
Nope, you're among friends. I'm a big wood-fired fan and, a big DIY fan. So, James, it's a shame I don't have your book on my shelf. I will have to get me a copy here after this, because, yeah, big fan of just, the construction principles and everything that goes into sauna building, because I do think, like yourself, you can get led astray online really quick. And if you don't know any better, and if you don't have the means to test it yourself, where is that good information going to come from?
That's right. That's exactly right. One of the first things that really disgusted me was everybody told me to use stainless steel fasteners because the sauna is a wet and hot and muggy place. And I work in corrosion as my profession. I work in the corrosion engineering department at a very large energy company. And I wasn't sure that that was true. And I decided I am not going to spend an extra $1,000 in a sauna when it's probably drier inside of there than my house. And I proved that. There's no need for a fastener that's any better than what you would use in a normal house construction in a sauna.
So yeah, like a nickel zinc stimple, fastener right off the Lowe's rack.
Right, exactly. Except you want to use galvanized roofing nails when you put your roof on, because that's the accepted standard. And that's not part of the sauna per se, but I don't want to give anybody the wrong idea that use something subpar there.
If you're building outdoors, make sure you're, building the code. Who knows what the HOA or the county zoning board is going to say about your structure. Make sure, you're not letting water in. Do it the right way. There's plenty of resources about simple roof construction out there because there are a lot of codes, especially when it comes to roofing. So a lot of good resources out there for that. But again, those sauna resources are sparse. But Risto, you were going to say.
Well, I was going to say we got kind of the overview there and just kind of like dipped our toes into ventilation and fasteners. And I definitely want to come back to that. So, especially ventilation. I think we should dive all the way in for the ventilation conversation.
I might use my some of my books to refresh myself on the data that I collected. And
Perfect. And I would like to find out like what resources you consulted, which ones that you found were the best, which online communities and people maybe that we've heard of that you talked to and compared notes with. But before we get into that, I would like to just hear, how did you decide to build a sauna in the first place?
when I was in high school, I was a swimmer, and our coach was years ahead. And our high school, of all the crazy things, had a sauna. And he made us sauna after we would swim 8, 10 miles a day. And after that workout, we sauned, and then we went to the showers, and then we recoup by the next morning to go ahead and repeat that constant endurance swimming. And I loved it. I just thought that was so great, but there's no saunas anywhere. North America's got a deficit of sauna, and I've always wanted a sauna all my life. And then my friend Kimo, I went to college with Kimo. He's a friend of mine from Finland who went to the University of Wyoming when I was there. And we talked about things like sauna, and he was into ice water. I thought he was crazy. He literally jump in these frozen lakes and swim and do things like that. And then he got me into sauna. Now I'm really officially a nut. Benefits of that are so amazing.
Yeah, and actually, speaking of making people jump in cold water, sorry to interrupt here, but there was an article where Arrow Sam and I in the Silent Sports magazine, a little early morning cold water swimming.
Love it. It's a wonderful thing. And so I was doing a lot of the cold water up until I bought a sawmill. And I've always been a hunter. I like to be able to recover from a long day's hunt in the wild mountains. You get a lot of walking in. You might walk 10 miles, cold weather, tough times, but you want to go again the next day. I always wanted a sauna again. And so I said, well, I'm going to build one. And so I just started to look at the different ways of building. I chose the German cabin architecture over the dovetailed corner. I understand the dovetail corner is stronger, but at the same time, the number one problem with those cabin style buildings is rot in the corner because those dovetails catch water. So I went with the vertical log four corner, and you can see it in this right here, these big spruce logs on the corners, and these are mortise logs into those corner logs. They are fastened. They meet the strength requirements, but there'll never be rot because your water is on the longitudinal of the log and not in the end grain. And so I chose that design. I thought it was kind of cute and I liked it. And, I'm not saying that everyone should have to do that. Dovetail's fine. I do recommend if you do a dovetail corner, you get big wide eaves. That's the whole thing that protects the sides the most is the wide eaves on your roof. And I did that on mine. I put the big overhanging eaves all the way around so that I kept the water off the walls. Excellent. But then I got this thing all built, and I said I've got it ready to go, but I want to know if I got it right. So I called him, and he said, "Be sure you ventilate it correctly." And I said, "Oh, I never even thought about that. How do you do that?" And so then he told me how he had his ventilated, and he was on a concrete slab, so he didn't have the same way to bring air in that I do. And so I thought, well, okay, but I better check to see if there's any other design. went on the internet. There must have been 4 different styles of the ventilation, but I narrowed it down to 3 primary styles of ventilation.
And which 3 did you narrow it down to?
One is 2 styles use a gap under the door. Seems to be very common. And the one style that differs from that is they bring air in, supposedly cold air in over the stove 1 meter above the stove. Okay. And that's what Chemo had in his. I'm like, that doesn't seem to even make sense. And then online, I had another one where you have the gap under the stove, but you have your vents way up high. And so I said, well, I wonder which one of those 3 is the best. So I started with Chemo's. I put a meter over the stove. All my hot air went right out that meter vent the other way. It wasn't coming in, it was going out. Okay.
So sorry, you had one, you had a gap under the door
A gap under the door.
and then just a vent
Well-
above the stove, like a few feet above the stove.
Yep. And I thought, the cold air is supposed to come in and go down on the rocks, go up, right? The cold air didn't go in. The hot air went out. The cold air came in below, and my thermoclines went like this. So my bottom bench got cold, and it was 200 degrees on top because all my heat's going out up there. And the same thing with the 2 vents up above. Your heat's going out those vents.
No circulation.
Yeah. So I thought, what about CO2? CO2 has got to tell the story. When I'm sitting up there, I want to breathe fresh, clean, pure air. So I said, I'm going to design number 3, which I didn't know was the Finnish standard. I didn't know that until I bought my Narva stove that showed the same thing that I had learned and put in this book. So what I did is I brought in air underneath my rocks at the bottom.
Like near
Yeah.
the floor?
It
Okay.
came in from the back wall into the rocks around the stove, and I call it an air dam. But like on the Norby stove and on the Havana, they have a sheet metal surround. That's virtually what I call the air dam. So what that does is prevents CO2 that's down on the floor from mixing with the fresh cold air coming in below, letting it rise. But you don't want muggy, stale air mixing with your fresh air coming in the upper chamber. And so then I also have another vent on the floor instead of the door going out. And I can turn a fan on if I have a lot of people in there, but I don't need to for just 1 or 2 people.
Like an exhaust fan, or what kind of fan?
I push the cold air in under the stove.
Okay.
And that, when you go to this picture that I have in this book here of this ancient deal here, this right here is a trench. In that buffalo horn, there's a hole, and it follows a trench that goes in underneath the pile of hot rock. If you look at this teepee, that's the smoke. The wind is coming from this direction because of that teepee right there. This is what they call the high pressure side. This is the low pressure side by the door. So as the wind blows, it's bringing cold air up under those rocks. It's filling the upper chamber with that air. And on the lee side, the stale air is being pulled out. And they would have 20 to 30 people in one of these. So they had to have it right. You're going to die if you don't have it right. And it is the same as the finished one.
And that's the perfect illustration of, when we talk about ventilation and placement, we often ask the question, especially if it's an outdoor structure, which way is this thing going to be oriented? Because if you've got predominant winds that are coming from a certain direction, you need to take that into account.
You do, absolutely. Prevailing wind, and that's the reason I don't have a gap under my door. Because it's going to be the one that pushes the wind in the most. It's going to have the highest pressure. So my door has no gap. I bring my cold air in just like the Native American underneath, and it comes up, and then everything, because I'm creating higher pressure by like a fan, it's pushing it out the hole that I have, that I can adjust the vent pipe to the prevailing wind
I think I understand the input, and you have a fan that can push the fresh air in by the rocks in the stove.
My fan is located on my garage, and I pipe it. I pipe the fresh air underground, and I do a couple of loop-de-loops with the elbows underground to silence the air coming in.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Goes through several baffles, and the noise of the fan is long ways away. And then in the sauna, then I just have this nice pressurized air that comes up under the stove and is always pressuring away any stale air. Fresh air is coming up under the rocks.
Is yours a wood burner?
Yes.
Okay, so it's a wood burner, and then your exhaust is it on the floor, like kind of
It's
like
on the floor
the
on
opposite
the
side? Okay, and you said it's adjustable.
Yeah, I can change that should the wind change, come from the north or whatever. I can just turn the elbow and it pulls it the other direction.
My question would definitely be, you're pumping in, some fresh air into a wood burning, stove scenario. Now, did you have to maybe kind of in learning, your balance? Is there a certain magic mix on your stove now when that fan is running versus when it's not to get the good burn? Or, do you have any backdraft issues? Or tell me about, the setup for getting that stove to run efficiently with a pressurized room.
See, that's an interesting question. I have found that it's completely adjustable with the draft. I don't have a damper. I don't use a damper. I have a big 6-inch pipe that's thick, quarter-inch thick pipe in there. I can open my stove up full blast, and it really goes like mad. And I can change with this. All these Narvis are just such a wonderful stove. My first home built stove, I could do the same. And I've gone through 3 stoves, testing them. The first stove was destroyed by using salt therapy, throwing salt water on the stove, and the corrosion rate was so fast it went through the stove in a week.
Wow.
So I'm telling people, don't use salty water on your stove. That's a big one. Don't use salt. You can use salt in the sauna, bricks of salt, that type of thing, halotherapy, but don't put it on your stove. It's the only thing I say. Don't do that. But no, they were easily adjusted, all of them. The first one I had, I fed the wood from the outside to avoid the mess, and I learned very quickly that was a bad idea. The stove is your number one exhaust in a sauna. The stove itself, I can't remember what it is, but it's like 70 cubic feet per minute. That's one of the sources of ventilation is your stove itself. If it's on the outside, you're losing about 25% of the heat generated by the stove. Some people do that because they have a heated room on the other side and they make good use of that. And then they use powerful enough ventilation system to overcome the fact that the stove is not contributing to this. But that stove is one of your major contributors to ventilation. A lot of people don't understand that. And
How do you find the mess to be?
if you have a good system and you're tidy, no problem.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I've never had an outside feeder, never ever in my lifetime, and I don't really understand to talk about the mess. It's like there's no mess.
I love my new Narvi stove inside. I have 0 problems. I fill it with wood. I sweep up the little bit of mess. It stays pristine. It's just perfect. It's not a big problem. But some people, that's an appealing thing. And I'm not going to say that that's not an idea that they should have, but I don't think it's a big thing myself.
When building a sauna, this is the tricky thing when you haven't done it before and you're just reading things online.
Yeah.
It's hard to know. Like, it is true, it is cleaner if you have an exterior feed and you don't have to hassle with going in the hot room. But until you've owned one and done it, it's hard to know, well, how big of a deal is that? Should that be a number
Right.
1 priority, a number 5, a number 10? And so it sounds like what you're saying is it's really just sweeping up a few minutes, and if you're kind of careful with stuff, it's really not a big deal to have an interior feed.
By the time I put on my final wood before I enter, I'm entering a sauna that has a full load of wood burning. It's clean. And so I have no mess. And I completely get my full hour sauna no problem. And I don't have to add any more wood through that period. I'm a firm believer in making the sauna inside fully, how do I say this? Make sure that the heat is fully penetrated into the back logs, preheated enough that you would close your eyes, you don't know where the stove is. That's a big thing to me right there, because you got to get it hot enough, to do that. Because if you're not, there's nothing worse than just a weird feeling, I guess. It's almost like one of those microwave saunas that they sell at Walmart.
Absolutely. Well, and I think anyone that's been or used a wood stove more than a couple of times knows the difference between a heat up, kind of a plateau sustaining fire temperature, and then a come down. Those are three very different experiences when you're splashing water on rocks, as they're either heating, very hot, sustained, or cooling. And so you're getting different kind of a different vibe in steam. The room's reacting differently. I'll admit it. I'll jump the gun. If the rocks are making steam, I'm jumping in there sometimes. If I'm antsy. But James, I definitely preach that same philosophy. Let that sucker warm up a little bit extra. If you think it's ready and you've got time to spare, give it a little bit more time, that especially if you've got a stove that's working for you.
Exactly. And I will say there's another little thing here. When I first started to sauna, I sauned every day and sometimes twice a day. I had some health issues. I have this ankylosing spondylitis thing that has come, and it has some inflammatory problems. And I went with the ultra high mass. I had over 2,000 pounds of hot rocks in my sauna. When I would finish sauna at night, it was ready in the morning still. All I had to do was add a little small fire and keep that going. It was very lovely because it kept the sauna hot all the time. But, firewood doesn't grow on trees. It gets to a point, it gets very expensive. So I decided finally, my stove started giving me just a little twinks of trouble, and I just decided I'm gonna go order one of those fancy Finnish stoves. I have never been so happy with that Narvi as I am. I mean, it's so controllable. The ash door on it, I can make it do things I never thought of, but it doesn't have the mass. I'm not gonna be hot in the morning anymore because that mass it cools down, right? So that's the difference between high mass and low mass. Same experience, it's just that the high mass gives you sustainability with the heat for day after uses, where the low mass, like a container, is like for the once a week that I do now. It's much more practical.
Have you ever thought of maybe adding some stones and maybe wrapping either the stovepipe, or something like that, utilizing any extra heat source for some more rock mass?
Before this Narvi, I had rocks all the way up to the ceiling almost on the stovepipe. It was one of the softest sauna experiences you could imagine. And with the air and the heat dam coming in from underneath, the thermoclines, my floor was 140 degrees.
Wow.
And right now with my Narvi, it gets 120 because of this idea of bringing the cold air through the rocks coming up and making the air go out at the bottom. You lower the thermoclines and that lowers the heat. And I was really worried with my Narvi because my lower bench is too low. It was adjusted for a much shorter stove when I first started. And now I've got this stove that's a foot over my lower bench. My wife complains about her feet getting too hot if she puts them up on the foot pedestal. And I'm happy with that.
That's a good problem to have. I'd mentioned that we were sauning as a family the other night, and our stove is a little undersized for our sauna. But my brother-in-law is thinking about building one and getting one that has a giant rock mass for the heater. And I think it was our second oldest daughter said, "Oh, it would be awesome if you could just make infinite steam in a sauna."
Mm-hmm. That was something with 2,000 pounds of rocks that were all 300 or 400 degrees. You could just make steam. And my kids, honestly, when they've come, this was new. They had never experienced this. And now when they come, that's the big highlight of their trip is to be able to have a sauna together. And they just enjoy catching up with each other. You know, my one son's at Notre Dame. He teaches there, and my other son's down in Cheyenne, Wyoming. He works in the same industry I'm in. But when we all get together, that is one of the most cherished things that's become a new family tradition is going sauna.
Yeah, I know exactly where you're coming from. I was interviewed, I don't know how many years back, by Glenn Auerbach, and he was asking like who would love to go to the sauna with, and I said to him, my dad, I definitely would want to once more. You know, he died like almost 25 years ago, so there's no way going back. But really, you know, that is the thing. This is very enjoyable, this discussion, and I, you know, the CO2 discussion and what's going on, and the you know, the gap underneath the door, and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It is mind-boggling, and I'm not sure if we have really touched through the surface yet where we should be. I think Sam, don't you talk about often like you used to have like these vents like more, you know, way more vents that you necessarily need because of the twisting and the adjusting stuff.
This right here, this is the thermocline graph that I produced with the old system with the vents above and the system with the vents below. You can see that the red is the temperature on with the vents below on the floor, and this is with the vents, the higher vents. There's just an incredible change in the thermoclines. Just venting. That just one simple step does that. And then we look here. This is the dew point, desiccant standard conditions. Inside my house, the relative humidity was 43. That's pretty dry. The dew point was 24.9 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside my sauna, the relative humidity was 25, and this is when it's cold. But you got 43. Why is sauna so much colder or so much lower relative humidity than the inside of a house? It's wood. Wood is a desiccant. When you drive the moisture completely out of wood by having it so hot, it's constantly trying to normalize until it finally does. And then it will go back to what's happening in the house. But if you're using it every day, that isn't going to happen. It's going to be dry.
Yeah, and so, James, yeah, a little bit about my, home build. I down in South Carolina here, it is humid. No doubt about it. It is humid down here, and trying to keep anything dry is a, pretty much challenge. But when I built, my wood burning sauna in my wood shop, it's been a great, basically giant little bag at the bottom of your beef jerky for my shop because it's always colder, it's always circulating air. That's why I built mine with a lot of more gaps. I didn't use tongue and groove because my wood, it's moving like this. The shop could be relative humidity of 90% any given time, where my sauna's getting down to the 30s. It's battling, but it is going to be sucking moisture out of there when it's not in use all the time. So my wood definitely moves. So something to think about too. Like you said, if you're running your sauna good and hot, your wood is good and dry, that's pretty much going to be your contraction point. That's where the smallest your wood is going to get. But if you haven't saunaed for a while and you've got a, Northwood sauna, up on Lake Superior and it goes through a rainy week and all of a sudden, that sauna's at 100% humidity for an extended period of time, those joints are going to swell. And that wood is going to be the maximum probably size it will ever get. So those are always kind of good ways to kind of know, hey, what am I working with as far as tolerances?
And see, that's another good reason with the the dovetails, they tend to get tighter with more use. But what people don't understand with the four corner logs, expansion and contraction are equal. When it gets expanded and contraction, the whole building moves together and the log gaps stay the same. Everything have just been so impressed with that type of construction for it to be able to just stay without creating giant gaps between my logs, any of that kind of stuff. It's been very, very good that way.
Well, I saw your charts and it reminded us, I don't know if you've ever connected with him, but our friend Walker, who's been on the show, he's measured a lot of the things in the sauna, CO2.
Yeah,
um,
Walker, he was the one that kept telling everybody you vent off the floor. It seemed like he was the only one that would bring that, and people just were just like going after him about that, just like he was crazy. I'm like, I'm gonna try what he says. He makes the sound case. He's a smart man. And that was the third one. That's what I tested here. And on my CO2, my air damp system. Now keep in mind, the United States CO2 is 400 parts per million background, okay? I mean, you can't measure CO2 under 400 because that's our background in the air. All right, that's why it starts around 400. In the air dam system, I maintained in the upper chamber background for the entire 4 sessions, 1 hour. Never once did I exceed background. With the vents in the top in the old style system, they got up to 1130 or well over double the background. And I had a CO2 generator, dry ice, completely unsafe to be inside during this whole thing that I set this up. Walker's right. That's the proof right there. He knows what he's talking about. That's exactly what's going on. That's the old Finnish traditional style too.
I love that you're experimenting. I love that you're thinking about it, consulting different sources. I don't mind that people kind of get into it online and argue about stuff back and forth. I think it helps us. I think as long as we're committed kind of to the same thing as the sauna community of like we'd like to build a good sauna.
That's exactly it.
I think over time, especially if we can take time to ask each other questions and learn from each other
Mhm.
and have an open mind, I think we benefit each other by trying different things and hearing different perspectives.
I agree, and I didn't know what I was doing when it came to this.
And honestly, that's gotta be the best place to start because you
Mhm.
weren't, I feel like if you grew up with it, you would have probably been a little bit biased towards whatever you
Mhm.
grew up with, or maybe if, a cherished sauna. Now you did have sauna in the background, but again, I got to imagine the high school sauna probably wasn't the model for star ventilation either.
It was not the
So,
best.
yeah, the glorified YMCA's, if I see you in there, taking notes from your, local gym sauna,
Mhm.
might raise an eyebrow.
Yes, exactly. I decided, to get it right, I have to try all. I have to test it. And then I have all this data that I've done all of this experimenting. It was only right to share my findings and write a book. I'm not trying, there's absolutely no money in books. I'll tell you that. There is. I've been a writer for a long time now. I'm a writer on Medium, and I think I've got $1 in my account now. I'm not doing this to get rich. What I write because I enjoy writing. In this particular area, I wanted to add to the field what I had found out. I'm not trying to tell anybody what to do. This is what I found, and a lot more, but
That's kind of like the academic endeavor is you come into the field with some humility. There's been
Mhm.
other voices there that have published and have all kinds of letters behind their names, but then you try things out and you try and find something to contribute to the field also. And sometimes you challenge the existing conventions, and that's okay. But yeah, I think that's good for the sauna world that we're having different,
Mhm.
even like from different countries coming in and
Yes.
maybe influencing Finnish sauna a little bit.
And anybody in the, with a little bit of background in metallurgy or chemistry and corrosion, you got to probably have a little a good understanding of the, basic scientific process and what you're doing as far as, hey, I've got an idea, I'm going to test it out. Hey, and if it works, great. If it doesn't, hey, I've got data now to make a good guess on the next go round. And so I love the fact that, you've blown through a couple of stoves. You've tried a few different things, and you've really, sounds like to me, you've landed on your dream sauna now.
Yes, yes, it's healing in the mind, it's healing in the body. It heals the spirit, it heals the body, it heals the mind. I don't know of anything else that I could ever compare it to, but I know I have used I call them the Walmart microwave saunas. I've tried those. And for me, they're not my thing. I need the deep cleansing heat. You guys know what I'm talking about. Yeah.
100%. 100%. Yeah, we've got a question here for you.
Yeah.
Lori's saying she's asking if you've done one of the smoke tests to visualize the air movement in your sauna.
Actually, when I did the CO2 test, that is exactly what that is without actually seeing it move. But my instruments tell me what's going on the same way. And so I know what is happening with those internal air currents based on the measurements of the CO2 that I receive. So my CO2 wasn't generating smoke, it was generating CO2 and lots of it. Enough that if you went in there when I was doing it, it would kill you in the old system. But it wouldn't, even with that high of level of CO2. I'm talking about a chunk of dry ice basically just pouring CO2 out. I couldn't put enough people in my sauna to put that much CO2 out. And I validated that. I was receiving fresh air in the upper breathing chamber, and down below, the CO2 levels going out the floor were through the roof. This is the biggest misconception online, and it's dangerous. CO2 in the sauna environment goes down. It does not go up. The only way CO2 goes up if it's reheated and becomes very light density to move up into the airstream. But when you breathe it out, it's 98 degrees. It's the coldest air in there, so it heads directly for the thermocline on the floor that's closest to its density. And that's where it gets vented out. So that was just an amazing test. And I spent a lot of money getting the CO2 detector to do that. I had to measure it from the outside because the hot air, you can't use this equipment inside of a sauna. It's so hot. And relative humidity, things like that, you can't measure that with equipment that doesn't cost a little under $100,000. Okay, so at that environment, you can get stuff that I have that's $3,000 or $4,000 to measure relative humidity and dew point at atmospheric pressure and temperatures down to like 10 below to 80, 90, 100 degrees. But after you're 100 degrees, you're out of luck with that equipment. It doesn't. Air holds more water when it's hotter. The hotter it is, the more water it holds. So when we're at 180 degrees in a sauna, we have to go to the charts to figure out how much that even possibly is. So one thing that I did is I said, how can I test this? I don't know any way to test this about this fastener business. So I took a piece of carbon steel and shined it up, and I set it in my sauna and attached it to the wall. It should rust. If I set it outside on my fence post, it would rust in 3 days. There would be flash rust on it in 3 days. It's been over 2 years and it has never rusted. So it has never once reached dew point, even after thousands and thousands of lowly.
Yeah.
Because it has been so hot that it can't be at dew point. So water cannot form on it. And if water can't form on it, it will not rust.
So that's amazing. I mean, and that it makes perfect sense. If it can never condense, if it can never get that, frosty, beer can, dew on the side of it, boom, no moisture, no water unless you're, splashing that crazy salt water mix that you had running around. I got to imagine nothing would stand a chance to that.
Trust me, I didn't spend a lot of money on that stove. It was an old home built stove that I had.
It's very interesting. I love this discussion right now. I moved to the United States when I was 9 years old, which was a while back. But anyway, so the thing is that fairly often when you go to or you look at a sauna in the United States, you open the door, you get this stale kind of this stench almost. And a typical Finnish sauna done right, it has this fresh. It's always fresh. We talk about this a lot, but we need people like you to explain to people that that's this fresh, woody, great smell in a Finnish sauna, whether it's hot or it's cold.
I thought of that very thing tonight, Errol. I went into my sauna and I loaded the stove all up for with wood and cleaned up the mess and got everything ready for a light after the show. Sunday is sauna Sunday, right? This is my big day to get my sauna. And I went in and I said, every time I walk in here, I feel like I'm walking out into the forest and it's so fresh, it's so clean, it smells of wood. I love that because no matter what it smells like outside, it's just fresher and crisper and cleaner in the sauna.
Love it. So that begs the question then, James, do you use any oils or do you use any scents in your water when you're, splashing it around? A little eucalyptus, maybe a little pine tar, any smells?
I did a lot of studies on that, and I want to tell everybody I have a warning about using oils and stuff. I never use oils or any of that kind of stuff in Lowry. I don't put it in my water. Don't throw it on the rocks. Never do that. You can hurt your respiratory system really bad if you do that with certain amounts of certain essential oils, and you can burn your eyes super bad too. Okay, because that's in that steam, and if it's coming on you. So I would never recommend that. However, I put some birch tar in once in a while in a little diffuser in the back. If I'm sick, feeling like a cold coming on, I'll put some tar in there, and, I hate that smell of tar. But I got some from Russia, and it's good stuff, and it works. Boy, if tar and steam doesn't cure you, you're gonna die. And if I was to do that in the Lowry, if I was going to do that, I would put maybe a drop in the whole thing of the lovely pail and mix it up good so that you don't overdose that into the air because you could hurt people's membranes, breathing, respiratory tract, things like that. You got to use a lot of wisdom with those types of things.
Yeah, I saw a video even just recently on Instagram, and the person had put some water on the rocks, and then they were taking, and this is a good, exactly what you're telling people they need to hear. They were taking the essential oil and then just chasing up that water directly on the rocks. When we use essential oil in our sauna, I have a glass liter bottle that I put 3 or 4 drops in that whole liter of water. I shake it up real well, and then
Yeah.
I get a fresh scoop of water and pour a little bit of that already diluted water
Yes.
into
Yes.
that. Yeah, and then the safest way is you could just put some leaves in water and, let that kinda steep for a while, and then you don't have to worry about the concentration as much.
Now, we, being in Wyoming, we practice something that is an ancient ritual with the Sioux, the Cheyenne. We don't have the whisk, the sauna.
Oh,
Oh yeah, Vita.
Vihta, yeah, Vihta, yes,
Okay,
yes.
we make ours out of sage. This is the purifying thing of the Native Americans. We're just abundant. I think it's called Artemisius tridenta is the name for the Latin name for it, but it grows. I have 1,000 plants of it all over the property here. It's just a wild thing that grows here, like birch in Finland. But we'll make a whisk, but I'll soak the whisk while the sauna's heating up, and some of that sage comes out into the lowly water. Okay, it's going to get some. Like makes kind of a sage tea, and when you throw that, I don't know. You should try this sometime. But those Native Americans, they knew what they were doing.
They knew exactly what they were doing.
They did.
It's so funny. And they did the same thing as the people back in Europe did. So it's just like, told
Yeah.
100%.
Wonderful. I'm a big fan. I usually probably, a couple drops of eucalyptus, a nice, pharmaceutical grade,
Mhm.
eucalyptus oil that is pure 100%. I'll put a few drops of that in, a pretty big thing of water, and then I'm splashing that along with regular unscented water too. So definitely love it. Feel free, but yeah, James, I definitely got to echo your safety concerns there because yeah, you can overdo it. It's a heck of a lot easier to start out small, maybe work your way up a little bit if you like the scent or not. But if you overdo it and you throw something on your stove that might be a little flammable or might be a little bit caustic to your mucous membranes or anything like that, all of our veteran listeners are laughing right now because they're reliving their, gas chamber days, at Fort Benning. Snot coming down their nose, and they're like, I breathed it all in. Don't worry about it. Yeah, whatever you're putting on those rocks is probably going in your lungs. So be careful of what you're putting on there.
All essential oils are intended to be used in that way in the respiratory chamber, so you should really do your research with these things. Don't follow advice on the internet. Go to the doctors, go to the people that manufacture these things and see if these things are consistent with their use and understand. Then walk into it very slowly if you're going to do it.
Yeah.
Sneak up on it.
Yeah, if you wouldn't smoke a cigarette willy-nilly, don't do this. Lori's saying she's using a diffuser cup. Smart.
Very
It's
smart.
not going directly on the rocks, not getting combusted, not changing a crazy amount chemically. So love it.
Right.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I've seen people even put like have a rack in their sauna and put like hay in there to get kind of like that hay smell. Or you could even, like it's gonna make a mess once it's dried, but like some sort of pine or coniferous thing, just even in the air as you create steam and just being in the room is gonna create a
Yes.
nice scent.
Yes. That's right.
Absolutely. I've got a lot of pine trees here, down in the southeast. Pine needles are abundant, pine cones are abundant. I could easily have a little basket of those things, fresh ones gathered up here and there doing yard work. Keep those, in and around to really, give it maybe just a little bit of a bump in that fresh pine smell. I like that idea. I'm going to try that. I before we go here, I do have to mention, I was tinkering around with my home sauna. I'll get some pictures up for the social medias and all that, but I did manage to put up a little cabinet next to the door for the sauna hats, some towels. Really pumped. This week is definitely going to be a good week. Head to the sauna, and it's always nice when you've got a place to put your stuff when you're going. So rather than throwing it on a dusty wood, I've got a wood shop, a lot of sawdust. If you put a sweaty towel down in my shop between the dog hair and the sawdust, you're picking up about 2 pounds extra on the way back up. So having a place to hang your things up, love it. I'll send some pictures to everybody. But yeah, we did get a little question coming in from Lori. Best place for my heater is in a corner. One wall is garage. Don't want next owners to accidentally let exhaust in. And the other wall is a changing room. Do I have to run venting to get to outside air? It's a good question. Depending on your build, depending on, what else you have access to, you may or may not need, access to fresh outside air, at least maybe a room that does. So again with the being a garage wall, yes, I can definitely see your concern there in case someone's working on an engine or running their car, letting exhaust come and go from a sauna. Absolutely don't want that. But if you do know you can run it in a controlled environment where maybe that garage door can be up, where that garage is getting fresh air, maybe there's a way to vent it off or to maybe close it off when there are cars or other smells and things that you don't want in there. Yeah, Risto, Arrow, any parting questions for James here before we wrap her up?
Let me start. I enjoyed this discussion a lot. We should, I think we probably should spend a couple of days talking about that ventilation stuff, but we're just scratching the surface. But it really is, and I really enjoyed reading the book as well. So James, we need you back. We definitely need you back one of these
Be
days.
fine.
So
I'd be more than happy.
thank you so much for coming here.
I would like to just mention to people that sauna is not a competition. If you're bringing new people into sauna, go easy, go slow, take it comfortably, let them learn to love it. Don't try to run it up to 200 to see how much they can stand and how much bravado you have. Teach them slowly to love the thing, because I have heard so many stories of people that do not like sauna because of the way that the guy that introduced them to it did that. And I just can't stress that enough. It's not a competition.
Well, I
That's
guess
a
I have
great point.
2 quick final questions.
Yeah,
What temp do you normally sauna at in your sauna? And then do you have a cold plunge?
I do. And I love my cold plunge. I have cold plunged at negative 35 below zero with ice floating in it. And I might add, don't add Epsom salts to your cold plunge in cold weather.
Yeah.
Can drive the temperature of the water's freezing point down so low that certain appendages can be frostbitten within seconds.
That's a great
Yeah,
that's a great point.
I didn't learn this by experimentation. I learned this by research, because I don't really want to find that out the hard way. Okay.
Oh, 100%. I remember, growing up, we used to make homemade ice cream, and you did that with a coffee can, and then you had a small jar inside the coffee can. Well, you packed the outside of that coffee can with salt and ice because it made it even that much colder. So
Mhm.
bring that freezing temperature down to 28, 27 degrees Fahrenheit. And that 5 degrees is a huge swing when you're talking about cold temperatures in the human skin. So yeah, definitely great. That's a great warning that we really haven't given out before. I don't want us to be the fun police either. Hey,
Yeah.
um,
There's certain things. And another thing, if you use Epsom salts in your cold plunge, don't use chemicals like chlorine. They create byproduct chemicals that are severely dangerous to use it. A lot of people like to use chlorine to keep the water longer.
Yep.
Then they want to put Epsom salts in there. Now you've just created a very toxic bath, and your skin's the worst organ for that.
Yeah.
Okay. So that said, but 185 on the temperature is my sweet spot right there.
Heck yeah. Heck yeah. And then James, a lot of rounds, or are you kind of a structured, hey, I'm doing 3 rounds, I got an hour, I'm doing 15, 15, 15, and maybe a couple of tens to recoup.
When I was doing it every day myself, I would do an hour to 2 hours a day, morning and night. Okay. And I had 4 rounds. It was very structured. It did me a lot of good, but I was in training for a big hunt that I was going to go on. Then I had a surgery in my neck, and I lost a very major part of my health. And I was really nearly, I don't know, I've never been so low physically able in my life. And I came back and I hadn't sounded. So when I started back, I couldn't take what I had acclimated to. So I started out just like most people should. I started out with 1, 2 sweat sessions and slowly worked my way back. And now I'm a full 4 session guy like I was before. I've spent up to 5 minutes in the cold water, but that is the highest I've ever gotten to. I don't recommend, and again, it's not a competition. But when I'm working on muscles, I work my way up to be able to get these muscles straightened out, because it's the only thing that works for me. Now I'm back to where I was very much in my endurance before my surgery and so forth. So it was very, very good that way.
Love hearing those stories because they're personal. You're not trying to, sell us a bunch of hocus pocus. You lived it, you breathed it. It's what works for you. I think that's really what we're really trying to say here, that the moral of the story, if it feels good, do it, but make sure it's okay to be different. It's okay to not be in there for another round. It's okay to not push it an extra 5 minutes. And it's okay to, splash a little water here, a little water there, maybe wherever. Sauna can be sometimes a little bit structured for everybody, but again, you can make it your own. We make the structures our own. We might as well make the practices our own too. So
James, where do you go to get this book?
Just Google it on Amazon. Amazon is the only place that it's sold. Amazon.com. Just look up Fire and Ice or Jimmy Creel.
well, we'll definitely make sure we've got a link in the comments when the when we get this edited up. James, thank you again so much for coming on. I think this has been enlightening. Check out his book, people. Check out our social medias. Check out all the sauna related things you can, because as you know, there's a lot of it out there now. So we're just hoping to bring you, a good side, a non-biased side, a side that's really trying to say, hey, this is finished traditional sauna. This is why it's great. We love it. We want to share it with you guys. So that's why we're doing it. But again, thank you guys. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, leave them in the chat. Email us, do whatever you need to do. Lori, you have a great night. Thank you for tuning in and your great questions. James, I'm going to leave it to you for the final word.
Too much of a good thing. It's too much.
Love it.
That's a good point. That is a great point.
Love it. All right, guys. You guys have a great night.